very glad to be back in my house after spending last weekend camping at Mystery Creek along with 4,000 teenagers. Gosh, it sounds terrifying when I say it out loud, and it was pretty chilly at Mystery Creek over the weekend. It's not generally the season that we do camping, but what a wonderful experience it was, particularly to see what God was doing in the lives of the thousands of young people gathered there. One particular campsite which was particularly impressive was the young people from the Salvation Army from all over the North Island gathered together and camping and learning about God and just experiencing life together. And hey, perhaps not surprising in this regard, the only church youth group with a trombone, which led them into the morning meetings. Ian Hutson, Lieutenant Colonel Ian Hutson, is the head of the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit at the Salvation Army in Wellington. You had family at the camp.
I did. You might not have recognised it, but if you saw a young, tall, slim girl probably in pyjamas in the daytime, it probably was her.
That probably describes about 2,000 of the people who were there. But, but I mean, hey, fantastic for the body of Christ to come together in this regard. Different churches from around New Zealand, different denominations, all worshipping God, all focusing on the Easter story. I do hope that she had, warm pajamas, because it was a chilly one, as I say, but a positive weekend.
Yes, a great event.
Now, by happenstance this year, the day after Easter, the day after Resurrection Sunday, happened to be the 1st of April. April Fools, anyone? And they played a bit of a prank at Easter camp. Where they said, hey, we've got this new thing we're announcing. It's, we've been working on it for a while. It's called Christmas Camp. And the blood drained from the face of the youth pastor that I was at Easter camp with. But it was just an April Fool's prank. However, some other things happened on the 1st of April, not just April Fool's Day, but the beginning of the financial year. A bunch of government policies kicked in. Talk to us about some of those, Ian.
Yeah, well, I guess the minimum wage has been enacted. There's some of the benefit changes that have come in, and I mean they are increases in the instances, but in some cases they're not matching the kind of increase that's happening outside for people. And in a way, for us, concern was around the fact that they, in actual fact, diminish the worth of them over time, and the minimum wage being a real key one for us, because many of the people that we see are on the minimum wage. They're the ones that come through the food banks, and we were hopeful that they would maintain the level that the previous government was tracking towards, a higher level of increase, and that hasn't happened. It's a minimal 2% increase in an environment where the cost of living is more like over 6%.
Now, some people would say 2% is better than nothing, but when your food costs are going up 6%, that's worse than nothing. Actually, that's going backwards in that regard. Hey, if costs went up 6% and you didn't get a 2% increase, that would be even worse. But honestly, right, we're not keeping pace on this, and hey, it's people on minimum wage falling behind, but also the case for beneficiaries?
It is, yeah. The same with beneficiaries, that their increase is being tracked at a different level. Now it's, again, not keeping track with where we would be hoping. And I mean, why it's important to us, I should say, is that it's people in New Zealand who are in poverty. The biggest reason for it isn't because they're lazy or somehow inadequate. It is because their income is inadequate.
Yeah.
And I know there's individual cases where that might vary, but so to us, it's really important that those areas like the minimum wage actually track towards, or if possible, towards a living wage.
Yeah.
Because and that got announced, it's geared for September, but an increase of 6.9% for that. And that's a voluntary thing that business owners agree to, but many more are starting to do that. And that's for a good reason, is that really people cannot afford to live on the minimum wage.
Yeah.
And why that's important, just to put it out there, is
Mm-hmm.
the minimum wage is not set on any particular, rationale, whereas the living wage is. It may not be perfect,
Yeah.
but it has got a rationale behind it.
Yeah. No, totally. And I suppose the minimum wage says, look, it is illegal. You're breaking employment law to pay somebody less than this per hour. Whereas the living wage actually enables your employee to live somewhere, to put clothes on their back, to feed their families, to be able to afford to get to work in the first place. One of these is sustainable, one of them isn't.
Exactly. And I know this is a Salvation Army advert, you could say, but William Booth, our founder, he had a measure for how we should, as a society, treat people or support people, and he called it everyone should have a cab horse existence. And back in those days, that meant you got fed, you had a roof over your head, and you had a job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that seems pretty simple, but at the moment, the way things are, if you look at the income that people are getting, it's not enough.
Yeah.
And that's why our food bank numbers keep growing over the years. That's why our housing register is so high.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things, that it's the roof over the head, it's the food on the table, it's all of those basic things. And it's not because individual people are lazy or, inadequate in some ways. Generally speaking, overall, it's because we're not got enough income,
Yeah.
those people, and there's not adequate housing for people. It's a couple of things there.
Now, some of this, some people would say, well, this is outside of the government's control in terms of some of the inflationary pressures. But there's also some things that are happening around about now, which are actually part of government policy. For example, the bus subsidies for children going to school. I know David Seymour was making some statements during the week talking about how wanting to bring down truancy levels. Everybody wants to do that, but if you've got families that are struggling to feed their children, you're scrapping school lunches, but you're also taking the subsidies off bus fares. It's going to
Yes.
get trickier and trickier. So yes, perhaps a small increase in benefits and tax relief for families, but it's going to cost more to feed your children. It's going to cost more to send them to school in the first place.
Yeah, I think those are really critical things there. And then if, for example, it turns out there's punishment for not attending
Yeah.
schools, it's a backward way. It's not making it easy. I'm not sure about the food. Have they committed to that yet? I know that we're sort of strongly saying we don't want that to happen.
Exactly.
But
Well, there's certainly noises around along those lines of saying, and I mean, I've talked with you about this beforehand, about yes, children need to be fed at lunchtime. Whose job is that? Is that the government's job? Is that welfare agencies, perhaps such as the Salvation Army, or is this something which the community and parents should be responsible for? So some issues there, but if the money isn't there, it can't happen. A community that looks after each other. Something else, of course, which isn't on the to-do list for this year, the government have announced their next 100-day to-do list. I think 36 different policies. Not on the list is a winter energy payment. As I noticed at Mystery Creek, things are getting colder and colder, and yet no extra money for people who are right on the margins to be able to heat the place they live in over winter.
yes, and that sort of that's around the accommodation side as well. I mean, basically what we've got is we're concerned about the fact that people live in cold, damp houses, and obviously if they can't heat them, that just adds extra cost to people, and people will sit in the cold, and then of course there's the health concerns that go with that. So we really did think that the winter energy payment helped people get through the winter, and that's across the board too. I mean, people have sometimes some picture of a beneficiary or whatever, but I mean, some of that could be include people on superannuation.
Yeah, exactly. One
who
of the
just can't.
one of the criticisms I suppose that some people might have made about the winter energy payment is, I mean, this initially came in as a COVID support thing when people were doing it particularly tough because of the restrictions of COVID. But there became a point with the previous government's policy where, okay, we'll put this in to support you for COVID, and then that just became the baseline, and then that just became the standard, and it just got locked in as something that we will always do. Some critics might say, well, look, we're not in a pandemic anymore. We don't need the same level of emergency support that we did back then. That was just for the pandemic. We've got to move forward. What would be your response to that?
Well, I think it all comes back to what we've thought for a long time, that benefits are inadequate. Going back to the 1991 benefit cuts, that's when the food banks started. That's when poverty began to increase. I think sometimes there's been a belief among some that if you make benefits, generally speaking, and there's all these little bits like winter energy payments and whatever, if you make them unattractive, it's not enough. It'll force people back into work, and then that'll solve the problem. But in reality, what it's done is trap people into poverty. They cannot afford, they cannot get up on their feet. They just survive, and that's what we've got at the moment. And kind of poverty. And I think the winter energy payment was one way of giving people some support during the hard months of the year. I mean, we actually was wanting from the last government a complete overhaul of the benefit system, but winter energy payments was a good thing that should continue until such a thing happens.
And hey, if people are living in substandard housing, which they can't afford to heat properly, then their kids are getting sick, they're not sending them to school. It seems a little bit unfair that we're then fining those parents for not sending their sick kids to school. It's a bit of a downward spiral in that regard. Well, Ian, very much appreciate the work that you guys do at the Salvation Army, particularly in the area of social policy, of keeping the government's departments and their policies honest, holding their feet to the fire in this regard. Thank you for what you do. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.